Because nobody's like you.
Now this section, which is a suggestion to start a guided writing practice, I have to thank Sarah Wiseman for, because she literally wrote the book, Writing the Divine. Now, a fun fact for those of you who watched the last class on forming your old wish-weaving circle, the chiropractor, Dr. Steve Koch, whom I interviewed after the first Wish Weavers workshop some 15 years ago, well, he and Sarah are now married, and that's just a fun fact for you. But the guided writing practice is a huge benefit for anyone who wants to keep in touch and stay grounded in your own authentic nature. And what I'm going to do is read just a couple of segments here from Sarah's very useful but also very, very funny book. And she starts here in the first chapter called What is Channeling? She says, when I first started channeled writing in 2004, I didn't talk about my experience with any of the people I knew then, because I was pretty sure they'd think I'd gone nuts. What do you say to the guy in the next cubicle at work, or the parents from the soccer team? Hi, nice tie, and by the way, God's talking to me. No, I mean God's really talking to me. He arrives in the form of my own personal spirit guide, and he comes to my house every day, and that's from the introduction, or from chapter 1, excuse me. Now, this portion is from chapter 3 called An Unexpected Receiving. And she's talking about a time in her life where after 18 years of marriage and 4 kids, she is going through an unbelievably painful divorce process. And so she had just moved into her own home, and she says this included loading everything deemed mine from the family home into a rickety rental truck. 2 burly movers, their mouths dark with tobacco, reeking of beer and sweat, were there to do the heavy lifting. I spent that morning in a state of numbness and belief, watching the movers haul things out of my old houses and dolly boxes into the gaping yaw of my new house. I'm moving here, I felt like shouting. I'm getting divorced here. I wanted to scream, but I was too tired, too fragile, too heartbroken. After the movers left, I stood with my meager furniture in disarray, stacks of unmarked and unidentified boxes, black plastic trash bags stuffed full of toys and clothes after I'd run out of boxes, beds not only unmade but lacking mattresses. The kids and I would sleep on the floor that night, and everything piled in the wrong room. Absolute chaos, complete chaos, absolute pain. Regardless of how I felt, I knew it was crucial to create some semblance of order before the kids came home from school, but I didn't know how to begin. The knife or scissors I needed to open all of these boxes was packed in one of the boxes, but which one? As I stood shakily in the living room trying to get a grip on my roiling emotions, I looked out the front window and saw a man walking along the sidewalk. To my surprise, he headed up the driveway and began climbing the steps to my front door. He's in sales, I thought ungraciously. I certainly wasn't going to let him in. Yet this man didn't ring the doorbell or knock. Instead, he stood there patiently, hovering outside the front door. And finally, as I stood in the living room, not breathing, hoping and praying he'd go away, he opened the door and stepped inside. Let me explain. He did not open the door in the same physical way that you or I or another human being might. I did not see him as a physical person exactly, even though I could easily describe what he looked like. Back then, I didn't even know enough to recognize him as a spiritual entity. But there he was, as clearly as anyone might be. My sense of him was overwhelming. I was pretty sure he wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a trickster either, although I knew very little about this kind of thing, having spent the last decade of my life at kids' soccer games, not seances. I knew enough to understand this being was the real thing. I just didn't know what kind of real thing he was. This being walked or floated or moved across the floor of my living room. And it was then that I met my spirit guide, Hajam, for the first time. Now, I bought Sarah's book when I was going through a really difficult period of my life. I talked about it in the very first class. I had quit a job so that I could continue my voice training with the Transformational Voice Institute. I was rapidly going through all of my funds, and there were times I wasn't quite sure which way to turn. And believe it or not, the first time I sat down to complete my own guided writing session, who did I meet? Spirit guide. Unbelievable process. Now, this is not something that I do a lot anymore, but I do it from time to time. And there were certainly periods in my life where I almost feel that this guided writing practice saved my sanity. Or at the very, very least, it really clearly helped point me in the right direction. So all you really do to sit down and start a guided writing session is to use the same tools that I mentioned before starting the guide walk. Put yourself into a semi-meditative state, which is kind of like a light hypnosis. It's similar to how I often feel when I have a shiatsu massage or acupuncture or polarity, which, as I mentioned earlier, is like acupuncture without the needles. But really the best way to do it is that deep breathing, and then try and get your left and right brains working together by seeing the mental energy flowing into the right side of your brain. But it's the deep breathing that really helps until you feel a nice, calm, relaxed state. And then you simply sit down and start to write. It's best if you can keep your eyes closed the whole time. Now, I think Sarah uses paper and pen. I've got some tendinitis in my hands, so I always use a laptop. And I just make sure that my hands are placed exactly on the keys where they need to be. And I close my eyes and I type whatever comes into my mind's eye, so to speak, or into my inner ear, as you might say. And I very often will start with a question. And very often that question is something as simple as, God, what would you have me know today? And then I take it from there. So it's really very simple, and it's an extremely clear form of receiving guidance from your essential self, your authentic nature, your higher self. So this is your next action step, is to consider ordering Sarah's book, Writing the Divine, and know that I am not receiving anything whatsoever from recommending her book, or if you decide to purchase it. And just think about whether or not you might want to start your own guided writing practice.
Because nobody's like you.